们现在时间还有，所以我们大概可以有20分钟到30分钟左右的时间讨论，所以我们可以先收集几个问题，如果朋友们想要请问2位专家或者是任何的意见都可以提出来，然后让我知道，或让我看到你们的发问。李完。
大家好，我想谢谢在座2位讲者的非常精彩的演讲，然后我想要请教Sam， 就是澳洲墨尔本的ACME 的体验长，就是在您投影片的最后，你提到了一个就是博物馆开始变成一个从access to object and works， 然后就是一个帮助人们接触这些艺术作品的一个地方，转变到一个变成是连结性就是在这个当中的一个连结性。那我觉得这里面的有一些蛮大的一些挑战。那尤其是连到您刚刚讲的这3个不同的一个组织改变这个当中，那可不可以请您再具体的举几个例子来帮大家来做说明？谢谢。
我想请教的一个问题是说，这个影响这个城市的进程背后的因素有哪些？这是我其实想讨教2位，这是一个问题。然后第2个问题呢，就实际一点，因为我现在在做的是很好奇的关于社会的转型和人的生命的转型这个话题。我想请2位专家站在你们的角度，有些创意，可以把这个命题有些创意。就这2个问题，谢谢。
我想问一个很具体的，就是关于刚刚 Nikio 的那个演讲里面的问题是，他提到 urban fabric， 然后他提到这种传统的城市中心以及商场作为一种像 downplace 的东西，它其实又有聚集的作用，然后又有私有化的一面。但是为什么他的结论里面提到说，我们现在是不是还需要的 image of the city？ 这个 image of the city 是一个我看起来好像是很在乎联通，很在乎这些人、信息、各种货物的流动的这样一个概念。但是为什么我们不再需要 image of city 了呢？就是可能就是conclusion 部分这一部分没有听懂。
I have a question for Professor about how you see the possibility.
We need another microphone.
Yeah. Right. This is okay. Yeah. No, I would like just to ask about how you see the reappropriation or evolution of restitution to the commons of places that are heavily privatized. You see it as a possibility.
好，那就是我们到时候可以先请Sam回答问题，然后再请各位教授。
Yes, assuming I can remember all the questions.
Let's start with Iliad's question. I think my last slide about the kind of transformation from the museum being as a place for access to the objects to a place to exploring the connection between the objects and also between those held by other institutions, both public and private. That really, I think the best example of that really occurs in the library space. The way that public libraries have, at least in the West, particularly shifted in the last 20 years from being places purely of access to books to and now being places of social communion and access to knowledge, but not necessarily books in their own right. And with my museum in Melbourne being a museum of film, television and games, these are things that already exist in the world. And so the value that my museum adds and my curatorial stuff add to that conception of why they are important. It is about how they are, what is meaningful about them, rather than access to them in their own right. And I think we will see this much more of a shift going on more generally in museums as museums begin to address the notion of all of their collections being digitized. Because collections are being digitized by visitors in any case. If I go to MoMA or the Met, almost everything that is on the display has already been photographed by someone in the public and probably shared on a social media platform, which probably means they are already available digitally. The ones that aren't available digitally are the ones that are not on exhibition. So that is, for me, the opportunity. And I think this speaks to broadly the notion that museums need to make the legibility of curation clearer. So when I go into a museum, what I'm interested in is why did the curator choose what they chose, perhaps more than what they actually chose. The reasons why things are chosen matter. The ideology of the museum, the ideology of the curation. So in some ways, referencing Professor Kobayashi's talk, in fact, we are looking at museums becoming more like the public street, where conversations and informal things can happen, rather than privatised shopping malls, which I think many, particularly the bigger brand sort of museums, are beginning to reflect the shopping mall and the transactional experience of that, and the surveilled experience of that more than perhaps other spaces. Next question.
It's about like creating human.
Oh, human creativity in the future. I mean, I think climate issues are the biggest challenge facing us now, and I think for me, reading fiction, it's interesting to read science fiction based on what it reflects about our fears about today, more than what it tells us about our visions for tomorrow. So reading about how we think about the future from the perspective of now. Reading Ubik tells us more about the 1960s than it tells us about today in some ways. And I think because I work with film and video games, particularly and television in my museum now, whereas I used to be fascinated with speculative design and design fictions, I'm now very interested in how particularly video games speak to how we think about our future and how we think about a quantified future and a gamified future. Video games are incredibly transactional and incredibly built around, developed for a psychology of quantification. And I think they're very interesting to study, but also very seductive. And I think that's one of the challenges for us, is to have a critical view of the seduction of video games and addiction to media, as well as a fascination about what our fascination with addiction is as well. Professor Kobayashi.
Okay, first I have to apologize because my English ability is not so good, so there must be some misunderstanding. So, the question from the lady on floor is about the image of the city. She said that the image of city is still important in contemporary society. And yes. My conclusion was maybe a little bit exaggerated, but today, yes, I agree that today we also need, and we also use image of city that connecting and imagining the elements of the city and to use and to live and to identify to the local society. But in case of shopping malls, and in case of the Bay Area, Tokyo Bay Area, the importance of the image of the physical or geographical city is decreasing, I think, and in the center of Tokyo, it's not so important to know what is the geographical structure of Tokyo is, because there are many signs. If you use subway, there are only the signs and indications that guide you to the destination of you. And even if you are on the ground, you can use mobile phone for your navigator. So the importance of the image of the city in the sense of Kevin Lynch is decreasing now. And shopping malls, the example of shopping mall and the Tokyo Bay area is idealized model of appearing the new aspect of our urban experience, I think. And questioning about the privatization of the public space, you asked me about what the return or what can we receive from the privatization of the public space. Reversing.
Yeah, private and public.
Get our
I
public
think.
space back.
I think.
Reclaim.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I think many people prefer such privatization of public place today because it's safety and it's clear and it's enjoyable. But I think there's a lack of autonomy of people and self-governance. And another point is there's exclusion of sometimes poor people or homelessness. Yes, safety from the 19th century, and safety and the hygiene was a measure of power. And shopping mall is one of the purified model of such kind of power. So I think it's very dangerous. That we used to such environment becoming normal. So I think it's necessary to make new public space, not in the sense of the neoliberalistic sense, but new public by people's own power and autonomy, I think. But it is not in the shopping malls. Yes.
Professor Kobayashi, can I ask you a question about the shopping mall?
Yeah.
When I was living in the United States, we saw the shopping malls declining, and the shopping malls being very empty, dead malls, and the rise of Amazon, or in China, Taobao. Does the privatized shopping mall enter our homes now? Where is this happening in Japan?
The same thing is now happening in Japan too, and this is another point of the dangerous of the new privatization of public, because Professor Nango, he is a co-worker of our research project, pointed out that shopping center is like a walking city. Walking cities coming to the town and settle down for 1 week or 2 weeks, and then go away. Yes. The shopping mall. Sometimes shopping mall is like this. When after building the shopping malls, the old centers decline, but sometimes shopping malls go away from the area. So there's no shopping malls destroy the old city center, and they have no responsibility. They don't. They seem they don't seem, they don't feel the responsibility for the regional society. So because their principle is to gain profit. So this is another dangerous point for the global common space today, I think.
Is there any 还有问题吗，朋友 ？OK， 杨老师。
I have two questions, and it was inspired by Seb's statement at one point when he mentioned that if our let's say experience with the museum and the archive changed so much, meaning the sense that how we can access all this digitally, why have a museum anyway, then how could we rebuild the museum? And I take that almost as a metaphor in regarding our cities as well, that the very same question will be very timely to ask to our cities. And being trained in the architectural background in urbanism, the museum often used as a metaphor in a way that to talk about cities. I mean, city itself is also a metaphor about the city. So in a way, we always look for the term that would finally get us closer to this huge mechanism that's in work. And yet there are all these kind of theories that are trying to, let's say, dissect the idea of this physical thing systematically. For one is being, let's say, the component, for example, malls, or even the element of it, which is the street block that compose the city itself. So the first question is in a way dedicated to Seth that do you think if now the museum project that you did could become a kind of a kickstart project for something similar to an urban street block, but something that now it's uninstitutionalized, you have no public funding, and yet still imagine a way to interfere and also rebuild this experience that we call daily life, but also thinking about all the audiences are not passerby, they're not visitors, they're people who live in this place. So just as out of an interesting thing to see the point. The second question is dedicated to Professor Wakabayashi. I hope I pronounced it right. That it, as a socialist, a social scientist. That's a horrible. How could you imagine nowadays to conduct social research regarding such a let's say a common environmental, social, also spatial unit of a street block? Because it's something that I always had in mind, but it's absolutely challenging. For example, one of the problems that we've been having is urban research is often conducted as what the Professor Wang Jian has attempted to show quantitatively. The qualitative measure is always the thing that's been, in a way, lacking in the measure. And so how could you imagine to conduct such a research from your perspective?
Okay, so on the first question, I think you are correct that I've seen the museum as a sort of a test bed for a city, or the notion of maybe a small town, a village. The Disneyland, what might Disneyland be? Museum, Disneyland, town, city, nation. And I think that the sort of idea that the museum offers an interesting view into ways that you might have a less digitized digital life. And I think being here in China at the moment, the prevalence of WeChat, or in the West with Facebook and Google and other things, this sort of public space, this sort of what I referred to at the very, very start of my talk about public space being eroded but becoming digital public space, that those digital public spaces are occurring on privatized platforms or highly surveilled, quantified platforms. I think there's a lot to learn from the civic hacker communities, but those are increasingly, I find increasingly conservative. We don't have an equivalent of, say, the squatters in public life in cities in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. What is the equivalent of that now? And I think we saw a lot of really interesting critical media art that occurred in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. There seems to be less of that now. There seems to be less critical digital art. It's kind of a little disappointing, in fact, that at a time when the digital public space has become how we experience the city. Navigating around Shanghai with Ilya yesterday would have been impossible without WeChat. WeChat was part of my Shanghai city experience. So the real Shanghai is WeChat Shanghai plus the physical Shanghai, plus the imagined Shanghai, plus the Melbourne cafe in Shanghai, all these things together. There is not enough artists. Where is the artists who are working with hacking WeChat? Where are the artists creating art based out of the data flows of WeChat? Where are the artists working with visualizing how people move spatially through WeChat and the physicality of the city? When we heard about that Alibaba worked with the cities and measuring traffic in a quantified way, where are the artists working with the computer vision cameras around the city that are intervening with artistic projects that reveal different patterns? That's the sort of stuff I think that there used to be quite a lot of that in the 1990s and the 2000s, and now as these platforms have become entirely global, there is less, and in fact we need more of that if we are to reclaim those private spaces as public spaces, because we don't. Others will. These are already highly commercialized. Everything that I search, I look at, I get served ads for in Australia. You know, every month when I go home, I will get advertising related to Shanghai in my feed for like the next month, because my phone knows I've been in Shanghai. We need more artists working on that in a way that the civic hackers were 20 years ago. And I think that's where there's sort of a critical role of artists in this, and I fear that that is being lost. There are other very pressing things that artists are commenting on around migration and climate that are equally important, if not more important. But I think at this time where so much of our responses to climate change and immigration and these sort of things will occur in digital public space, we need to be intervening more with digital art, because that's where conversations are going on. The tragedies in Brazil around propaganda spread on WhatsApp, these are things that artists should be talking about, because these result in genocide and many other things, and artists need to be talking more about this and making art about this, and that's how I think we get to a more just civil society.
Okay, about the question of the social research, today, according to the improvement of the information technology, and the data we can use for social research is growing, such like big data. But sometimes the quantitative data so grows to understand the people's life and the living world, because our society has different layers, and we live different layers or aspects of society, and the data such like big data or some quantitative data can only draw one or two or some aspect of our real life. This is essential or very important program for the social research and the social sociology. There maybe two kind. We have to make distinction two kinds of data. One is quantitative data and qualitative data. Sometimes qualitative data is subjective. In the other hand, the quantitative data is objective. But if we can't use or analyze qualitative data, maybe we can't understand our social life totally. So, of course, the quantitative data is very important, but we have to use other methods of research like interviews and field works, or sometimes the hermeneutics of urban landscapes to realize sometimes an unconscious level of social life, I think. So yes. So this is a very classical program, but our sociologists and social researchers every time thinking about this program, how can we describe the society by using the data, and I think we never describe the whole of the society or whole of the life, but we are trying to describe more and more totally. So we have to improve our method and research method to using many kind of data, many layers or many aspects of data.
OK 因为时间的关系，我们可能很快这边做一下总结，就是第一位王健博士可能用一个各位都知道他本来是学心理的，所以从心理学角度对城市做出一个诊断是，只要技术运用得当，或者是用他的话来说好技术，那么可以让这个城市的90%的资源不被浪费，90%的人有更多的能力去做别的事情，发展自己的新的动力，完全是从计量的角度，让技术变成是一种可以是 humanity 的，可以是人道的结果，这完全是不同的 perspective。那下带来的是另外一个问题，就是当地方的空间跟流动的空间你越来越难分的时候 ，access to object 接近一个物件其实变得不是那么容易，不是那么重要的，你必须把这个领域这种接近物件的领域换到另一个，比如我们跟博物馆的相处中间，或者我们去认识一个城市，甚至我们认识彼此的一种方法。那么他认为，正如他刚刚结尾说的，需要更多的，当我们要关心环境、关心人口、关心其他的地球上的问题，但我们需要更多的艺术家去重新 hacking digitalize the space， 就好像70年代的那个维权运动者要霸占世界的空间一样，要有更多的艺术家、更多的创意人来重新发现这件事情。那么李佳琦的教授他就回到我们urban planning 的概念跟社会学观念，提醒我们那个 我们其实现在可能不是城市里头有 shopping mall， 而是我们就是 shopping mall 里头的物品，等着被物流，等着被买跟卖，等彼此我们发生一些关系，所以情况可能比我们想象的严苛。那总结这第一个 panel 也让我们认识整个我们目前遭遇的各种不同的社会处境跟状况。那我非常感谢今天3位的演讲者，这都是2位坐在这里的嘉宾，我们请大家谢谢。